Good morning, wonderful people. Thank you so much for clicking this podcast this week. I am super excited for this episode. This is the second episode in our series, They Not Like Us, and I am going to talk about the first woman of color who just received a presidential nomination, Miss Madam Vice President, and hopefully Madam President Kamala Harris. And I'm going to talk about sort of like her positionalities, her multicultural upbringing, and what it meant for me, as an immigrant child to look at another child of immigrants, be on stage, listen to her speak. I've read so much about her family, her upbringing, that it really made me like very invested into like knowing her and to see her place in history, right? And I'm so excited to put this podcast together. I hope that you will also find it enjoyable. With the title They're Not Like Us, some people may think I might go one direction, but please listen until the end so you understand why I decided to include her in this series, because I find like I see myself in her, not just because she's black, not just because she's woman, but like her experience being a multicultural kid, right? Having to navigate her identity between being black in America, being Indian and Jamaican, having two immigrants' parents who are highly like educated, right? So all of those intricacies or positionalities make her very fascinating. Yesterday my mother was speaking to my uncle, and he has said this to me 50,000 times. He was like, oh, every time I see Kamala Harris, I'm always thinking about how when you become a diplomat and everything, how we're going to be proud. And it just showed me why like representation matter and why the United States is a very unique country in that sense, because it feels that Kamala's story, coming from an immigrant background, coming from her upbringing, like if especially like in the West, in Western countries, it feels like America is the only place that such a story can be written. I know people, it's hard for people to think about the American dream and stuff like that, but for immigrants specifically, we have an interesting relationship with the American dream, because part of the reason why you come here is on the belief that this is the country where anything can happen, right? Where an Indian student can meet a Jamaican student, fall in love, have two children, divorce, have their kids navigate life in America during the 60s, and share time between Jamaica, India, and the United States. And one day one of them become a vice president and a presidential candidate, and she's a woman, right? So America feels like the only Western country where this can happen to, right? And I used to say that there won't be like an Obama in France or in the UK and stuff like that. And then Sunak came. And if for people who don't know who Sunak is the current prime minister of Great Britain. And I remember somebody whom I've told that, yeah, like an Obama can happen in Europe. He told me, well, now Sunak is the prime minister. And I was like, and I told him this was my rebuttal to Sunak. Soon in Europe, class is preferred, like class is more prestigious, right? Where we think of race, right? In Europe, they think of class. So Sunak being coming from a billionaire status, like, yeah, it's more plausible for him to become prime minister, because he comes from a high society, like he comes from high society, right? But Barack did not come from high society. Barack was not a billionaire when he became president of the United States. So I'm still right to say an Obama cannot, like, will not happen in Europe unless I get proven wrong, and then they have a child of a Congolese immigrant in Europe who grows up and get into politics and then become prime minister. Until that happens, Sunak is not Sunak is not an outlier in Europe for European standard, because he is of high society. Like, he comes from high class. He's not a common Indian immigrant kid that is roaming the street of London. No, he's not. He's a billionaire, right? So so I will stand by my words and say that Obama cannot happen in Europe. Maybe not in my lifetime, But yeah, but today we're gonna delve into Kamala Harris and her nomination, her positionalities. I'm gonna make inferences and connections of her childhood based on what I've read and what I've seen and what I know, being a multicultural kid dealing with politics, right? And having to negotiate between a lot of identities. So I hope you will enjoy this podcast episode today. So let me begin with my reaction of the DNC. This election cycle feels very hopeful. And when the Obamas came, I remember, like, when Michelle said hope has made a comeback, I remember that feeling, right? Because we moved to the United States in 2008 during the presidential campaign, right? So imagine a refugee family coming to this country where they're very this is Cana, right? This is the land of honey and milk, right? And your first sight of a presidential election in America is of a Black man who is of Kenyan descent, right? And you feel very happy. You feel like, oh my God, this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, right? This is the land of milk and honey where possibilities can happen, right? So we moved here literally during the Obama campaign. So I remember sort of the excitement in my household. Now, my parents did not know how to speak English, but he was still a Black man. He was still a child of a Kenyan immigrant, and the thing about Africa is, like, when we are in foreign land, we don't care if you're Kenyan, you're Congolese, you're Nigerian, we stick together most of the time, right? so and for me, having that image as a standard for my first American election was really exciting, right? It was exciting for my family. I remember, I have a friend, Jean-Marie. So he is from Rwanda or Burundi, I forgot, but he is left-handed, and in our culture, they really look down on people who are left-handed. They say it's bad. It's a bad curse, right? So you cannot shake people's hand with your left hand. You cannot eat with your left hand or something, So a lot of left-handed kids, they get beaten for being left-handed, right? So his dad will always punish him for being left-handed. He will force him to write with his right hand and stuff like that. And when Obama won the presidency and he was signing, those papers, his dad was like, are you still left-handed? He's like, and he was scared to say yes. He was like, maybe. And then the dad was like, keep it up. The president is left-handed. So Obama for us was and mind you, and him having a year of decency, 8 years of decency, and showing Blackness, especially when I started understanding what Blackness looked like in America from different interpretation of it, right? It was refreshing to see the leader of the free world look like you. It was interesting to see a Black man show emotion. It was very fun. It was very heartwarming to see a Black man praise his Black woman, So Obama literally set the standard, right? So his campaign was very hopeful, especially for people who just migrated to the United States. And over the last campaigns, like I remember when Hillary was going against Trump, I was one of the only people who was saying that Trump was going to win. Now, I live in a democratic state, so a lot of people did not want to hear that, right? A lot of people were hopeful, but I was being a realist. I was like, well, based on my foreign observation, I think Trump is going to win, And in the words of Trevor Noah, Obama was your first African-American president. Trump is about to be your first African president. So as Africans, we were familiar with the rhetoric, So we were like, yeah, this is what people have been lying, that they believe in democracy and blah, 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 blah. So Trump is about to show them off, Trump is about to make them out to be liars, right? So those elections were very gloomy, right? The Trump and Hillary was very gloomy. And then Trump and Biden, we were a bit hopeful, but again, it was still gloomy because they were very neck and neck. And they felt like the pandemic is what helped Biden win. And when the second round of Trump and Biden, we were very ooh, But since Kamala became the candidate, you can feel the excitement. You can feel the hope. There's a rejuvenation of hope, right? Because it feels like something is coming. Something new is coming. Hopefully that something new actually happens, right? So I'm starting to feel that familiar, well, y'all know I butcher my words, that's similarities with the Obama campaign. And when Obama came and he spoke on Kamala and he drew parallels between their upbringing, I was like, as a African immigrant, as a child of immigrants, as a multicultural kid, I saw myself again in America. I felt that hope and dream again. I embrace the beauty of America, right? Because again, a lot of people look down on the concept of the American dream, but when you know what you've left behind and you see the hope that exists here, you will understand why for a lot of immigrants, they're very optimistic about America more than native born are, right? So those are my reaction about the DNC. But Kamala, right? Is it Kamala? Kamala. Okay, Kamala. I heard a quote lately that said, "It is important to study history because we are historical beings." Right? And reading about her family, I couldn't think of a truer sentence. We are historical beings. She is a byproduct of a Jamaican father and an Indian mother who migrated to the United States as students, defying what Westerners think of immigrants from developing countries. Let me say that again. Her parents coming to the United States for their graduate studies in the 1960s defied the perception that local people have of immigrants. Because when people think of immigrants, they think of poor, they think of, beggars, they think of people who are coming to take away. They don't think of, especially when you're coming from a developing country, right, or a global south country. The face of immigrants in America is the people at the border fighting to climb over whatever wall Trump built or something like that, right? Where most immigrants actually come here legally, where most immigrants actually come here, for studies, for work, right? And to think about the years, right? So I read that they both met in 1962. India and Jamaica were former British colonies. Now, Jamaica is, they don't have colonies, but they're still part of the British Commonwealth and stuff like that. But these people have this sort of common history, right? So what if they come here in their early 20s and India gained its independence in 1943, that means a portion of Kamala's mother's life was under British colonial rule. And her father, and I think he has talked about this, right? Where he has seen, the impact of colonialism in Jamaica. So now you're coming to this, so you're coming from places where oppression, the idea of whiteness and, white power or whatnot, right, prevailed in your home countries for decades, to study in a country where people who are looking like you are going through their own civil rights movements. Imagine that. Imagine the intersectionalities. Imagine the culture shock and like I'm trying to imagine it as I speak, and I feel like a lot of people are not really confronted with politics, right? Like some people, they just go to work, they just live their lives, If I have a good day, I have a good day. If I don't have a good day, like I don't have a good day. But there are people who are political beings, right? Whose life literally depend on the politics in which that they live in. And that's why I'm trying to bring this argument. Her parents, coming from Jamaica and India during that time, they have a first-hand experience of how their lives is literally impacted by the policies, right, that exist in their countries. As a refugee, like I can speak to this, is that because like when you're a refugee, you are literally at the mercy of like the UN or right. So like for example, some months we got food, some months we did not. Some months, and we could not work like to go get food and stuff like that. So there used to be like a truck that would bring us food and everything. And if it was there on time, we would get food. And if it wasn't, we won't. So we were literally at the mercies of the organizations that was responsible for us. I visited a refugee camp in Greece last year, and people cannot, because they're living in tanks, they do not have like a kitchen. So they have to get in line to get food every single day. There's no doctors in the refugee camp. So when they were sick, they need to wait 3 hours to go somewhere, and they was talking about how transportation is a problem for them. So their existence or their being and their daily lives is literally dictated by the politics that exist within the refugee camp or within like the administration that is supposed to provide them with service, right? So colonial times was like that, right? So you have these two people who come from those countries where they have like a first-hand experience of that, and then they migrate here for quote unquote the American dream, or to learn, to add on to their ambition and all of that, and then they see the people who look like them dealing with the stuff that they've dealt with at home. How do you even address that, right? And I'm trying to wonder, like, is there a documentary about like immigrants' life in the 1960s? Because the Pan-Africanism movement were happening on both sides of the ocean, right? Where leaders were communicating and collaborating to fight, oppression from both sides of the ocean. So I'm just trying to think about like migrants who moved to the United States during the civil rights movement. or how was their lives, how did they find the sense of belonging. I feel like there's a commonality in the fight, but knowing what I know about immigrant experience, having to debate between you're a foreigner, so this is not your country technically, and wanting to, also kind of embody the fight that exists with the country. It's a violent, it produces structural violence. I don't know if that makes sense, right? Because on one hand you're an immigrant, it's not your country, but then on the other hand it's like, are people going to take me seriously, right? And I think that they had an advantage because they can draw from their home experiences and speak to that, and I think that's the advantage. But knowing what I know is like some people are not very open to listening to you when they feel like you should be grateful that you're here, so shut the hell up, right? So I thought of that, and I thought of how that will influence and how that have influenced her, because I'm sure she learned about oppression from three perspectives, right? The Jamaican perspective, the Indian perspective, and the American perspective, which adds so much depth into her story, right? Which adds so much, and not everyone will understand those intersectionalities, right? So it feels like only people who are experiencing that with her can really understand. And now, plus, the other twist to this, not just that her parents are not the immigrants that people from the West think of immigrants, right? They are highly educated. They're coming here as, well-spoken, critical thinking people. But imagine being a child of immigrants. First of all, being a child of immigrants is one thing. But being a child of highly educated immigrants, child, is the reason of my depression. Is the reason of my depression, because with some immigrants who did not go to school and everything, there's always this conversation of like, hey, like, we couldn't afford this back where we come from, so use this opportunity that this country is affording you and go to school and stuff like that, right? But when your parents are already like highly educated and you come to another country, they have the same, like, they have the same strictness about education in this new country that they had, like, like in their native country, right? So they will literally tell you how they were number one. And if you happen to have an African parent, it'd be like, I was number one in school. I never got, like, I never got below a 98. So you are not gonna come here and embarrass me. So you feel like you are carrying the lineage, right? Because you cannot come here and mess up because they already set the standard for you, right? And that in itself adds another layer to your depression, because you're just like, damn, my dad is an economist, my mother is a cancer researcher. Like, ooh, I better be on my best behavior. I cannot behave like the other kids, right? And I don't know if she had the same thing, but for me, being raised in a inner city school where some students did not do well, right? So people will group you together thinking that because you're from this place, then you are also, like, you also have the same low academic levels. So when you are an outlier, not just to that group, but an outlier in the immigrant population, you sort of feel outcasted, right? You feel like the black sheep, regardless of which group you belong to, right? For me, like, I couldn't fit in with, like, the inner city students, because I knew as an African kid with a strict African mother, I could not do half of the shit they were doing. And then my teachers would be like, wait, but you're African. Wow, you're very smart for an African, you know? So you feel like damn, like I'm just different, you know? So I'm wondering how it was like for her, right? And I remember reading how she talked about like she grew up with an Indian mother and her mother installed Indian values to them. But her mother also understood that she was raising Black daughters in America, right? So that adds another context, right? Because Kamala Harris, regardless, like people are calling her Indian to kind of draw a wedge between her and other Black groups and stuff like that, which I think it's so stupid and so inferior and so low of the people who are doing that. But she is not Indian presenting. If she did not tell you that she had an Indian heritage, you would not look at her and think she's Indian. And I looked at the picture of her mother. Her mother is not Indian presenting. So I can feel her like I don't want to use the word troubling, but the confusion, right? Because we have a Black dad, we have an Indian dad, an Indian mother. We're living in America, so we're Black, right? Because in American context, you're Black. Because for some reason, we don't really value the duality in people's life. Because in America, you have to make sense to Americans. You have to speak a language that will make sense, you know? Because if you start to explain, people get bored. Americans like one word answers. So in America, you're Black, right? And so you're just like, but we eat curry at home. But we go we have Indian festivals. And then we go to Jamaica, right? So she has a worldly view that is beyond this single word of being Black, right? So how do you navigate to that? How do you choose one or the other, or how do you embrace that? Because in my experience, I've never been embraced by many groups, right? Even in my Congolese family, they view me as the American. So for my Congolese family, I'm American. For my American audience, I'm Congolese. So you're just like, damn, so where do I go, right? And she has to deal with three. She has to deal with, oh, Jamaican, but you're not Jamaican. Indian, but you're not Indian. Black, but you're not Black. Like, do y'all even understand the trauma, the culture, the structural violence that is? And now you have small-minded people being like, oh no, she's not Black, she's Indian. Y'all know that she doesn't present as Indian. If the police were to stop her, they would not see an Indian woman, they would see a Black woman. So stop it. And it's so easy to do that to Black people or to do that to other minority groups. And I always call Trump a German because he has German ancestry. He's a second generation American. So he's German. I always call him the German orange man. Because he's German to me. So should we start doing that to everybody? So stop it. It's not funny. Just stop. Stop. Because honestly, what you're doing is called othering. So Saeed brought up this thing, this concept of he says that we other people in order to show that they are not us. They're not like us, right? We other them in order to fear them, in order to hate them, right? And doing so, especially in this election, is to just help Trump win. Because if we want to be critical or intellectual, this woman, although her Blackness is filled with a lot of multiculturalness, in America, she's black. In America, she's black. That's her single adjective that define her in the context of America. Her subjective identity can embody all her different heritage, her worldview, but since when do people care about that? You know? Which kind of brings me to another topic, but like I'm gonna make another episode about the institution of blackness. And I've thought of this, right? Because it's like you will hear people like me talk about how like it took us a while to say that we're black and everything, and people be like, what do you mean but you're black and everything? And you have to understand something, right? In order to have blackness, there needs to be whiteness. In order for the institution of blackness to exist, there needs to be whiteness. And if you grew up in a place where there's not a strong institution of blackness or of whiteness, the concept of blackness, especially in the American context, does not have its place. Right? So like when you meet a Nigerian, if you ask them for their race, they will look at you crazy and be like, what do you mean? I'm human. If you ask them for their ethnicity, they will tell you either the Yoruba or Igbo. They will not go into like, oh, I'm black or whatever. No, because that's not the institution that has been created in that country. So we always have to look at how we define one another in the context of that country. But that is going to be an episode for another day. But yeah, so I just find her fascinating, and I find her story fascinating because she literally comes from an experience, right, an upbringing that just deviates from what people think, right? Even her mother being an Indian woman, she deviates from what the West think of Indian women, right? She did not get an arranged marriage. She's highly educated, she moved here for an education, and she chose to stay here and not go back and go through like an arranged marriage, the way we will assume an Indian woman will, right? The way an Indian woman would, right? So she just comes from an experience of just contradictions, right? To people, right? To a lot of people who do not have that experience, where they're just a walking contradictions of what people think should be, right? So it's fascinating to see. It's fascinating to just see her write her story. And should she become president? Because she's already vice president. She has already marked history in a major way. But if she becomes president, honestly, this is going to be the perfect story. It would be the perfect story. Like, as perfect as Obama, but with a little bit of twist to it, right? So, yeah, it's been very interesting. And she's a very interesting woman. And win or lose, she is a historical person to study because she's an historical being. Thank you for listening and for understanding the the long schema I took you under. And I'll see you guys next week. Or I'll talk to you guys next week. Bye-bye.